you hit on it there with talking about like the betting patterns, because that's the most important thing, and that's where you get your most information from. And like even people who play live and your live professionals, like the most info they get isn't whether the guy kind of scratches his nose when he's got a weak hand or a strong hand or anything like that. It's about how often they bet and how much they bet, all those kind of things. So yeah, like an obvious one would be if someone is a really kind of timid player and you just notice that they never will raise or they won't have a strong bet, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere they do something like that and re-raise you. Well, you might respect that more than someone who is constantly just throwing money around and chips in the pot and all that kind of thing.
That was former professional poker player Matthew Kepitis touching on one of the many things going through his mind and how he would analyse situations when playing a hand. Matt joined the show to talk about his time playing poker, touching on the mental side of it and explaining some of the things that players at a certain level may not understand. He speaks on the personal reasons that ultimately made poker so important to him, and then his journey out of the sport and into working around NBA gambling analytics. Before I send it over to the last episode of the year with Matt, I just want to thank everyone for listening, liking, subscribing, and for all the love I've received during the first season of Water Cooler Weekly. I hope you've enjoyed the first batch of guests that have come on the show, and ultimately hope that you will come back for next year. Thank you again, and please enjoy this episode with Matt. It is my pleasure now to welcome on former professional poker player and the second best gambling man out of Eltham, Victoria, Matthew Kepitis. Matthew, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Pleasure is all mine. So we'll get straight into it. The reason why you're on today is you're a very interesting man. You did some things that a lot of people probably wish they could have done, but did not have the brain capacity and the cojones to do it. And you played professional poker for a number of years. I guess we'll start off with how you got into poker and maybe what it was that attracted you to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, I started off when I was 18. I just finished school, which was end of 2005, and I never had any interest in it up until I remember reading an article in the newspaper. Joe Hasham had just won the World Series of Poker, Aussie guy, and he'd taken home a couple million. And I was like, all right, well, this sounds pretty cool.
I'd like a couple of million.
Yeah. I just finished, year 12 and summer break before uni. And I guess I was thinking this is going to be my big chance. But I didn't sort of dive into it. Big stakes or anything like that. It was pretty much the total opposite. I just sort of saw poker and I started playing online for some free games and did that for a little while until I thought, well, this is boring. I want to, up the stakes a little bit.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, I'm going to try and play for a bit of real money. And, when I talk about playing for some real money, I was taking, sitting with $1 buy-in and 1 cent, 2 cent chips. I remember after sort of playing through summer just to kind of kill some boredom, I guess, for a bit of it. I remember going to my dad. I was 18. I don't think I even had a full-time job at that stage and didn't have a credit card or anything like that. And I asked my dad, I was like, look, if I give you $100 cash, can I use your credit card to deposit into, online poker website? And I said, if I lose it, then I'll never ask you again. This is it. So, he agreed to that and I gave him the cash and deposited $100 in and sort of thought about it in terms of being as conservative as possible. And I wasn't just sitting down with $100 at the table. I sit down at the smallest sort of stakes I could. And yeah, sort of kept playing, and I guess that was kind of the start of just working my way up very slowly from literally the lowest stakes you possibly could.
Okay. Do you remember a moment that maybe everything changed where you were like, this isn't something that I'm just going to kill time with or a hobby?
Yeah, it was sort of like I was saying, finished school, started uni, and it was just like a real sort of transitional time in life, I guess. And things was like totally different. And I was, I guess, finished year 12 with like a group of friends, and I kind of had this realization after I'd finished that like maybe these weren't the people I wanted to hang out with forever. And I was just in this sort of state. I wasn't like a total loner, but I just, had a bit of time to myself that I wanted to, really kind of bury both my time and like complete attention into it. So I was reading all the books, reading every forum I could. Started at uni, and I actually started a proper job at the same time. So my first job was selling merchandise at the MCG, like flogging scarves in those vans out the front, which was absolutely like perfect first like job.
Yeah.
Paid like pretty well for, at the time I think it was like $25 an hour, and maybe you get like a 6 or 7 hour shift out of a footy game, and you're busy for half an hour before it, and 15 minutes afterwards in the rest you could kind of sneak off and watch the game or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was enough sort of drinking money for the start of uni. And then I think it was probably like a couple months into that, and all of a sudden I'm sort of working my way up the stakes a bit, and then consistently was sort of pulling in, I guess, more than I was from work, which was still not much. It's maybe getting a couple $100 a week and building up your bankroll. And then I think I actually might have even worked that job for, I think it was maybe 2 seasons of the footy, so it's probably like 2 years or something. But like by the time I got around to the second one, I was like, I'm making way more from doing this than working a part-time job or whatever. And like at that point I was sort of like, well, I'm actually costing myself money by working the job, and sort of knew what my hourly rate was there compared to if I was sitting at home and playing at the tables. So from that it was pretty much a full-time gig for me.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I think one of the craziest things, because I'm not someone who is good at poker or ever, sort of took not that much interest in it, but I didn't realize that you're not just playing one table, right? Like how many tables would you play at a time?
Well, that was it. I guess like, people think of the popular conception of poker sitting at the tables at, a casino or something, and you got the cards in your hands. But I was like purely online. I just started there, and I found it more entertaining and more convenient, but also like you could just be a complete sicko, and instead of playing maybe 20, 30 hands an hour, like sitting there slowly going on, you can obviously, like you said, play multiple tables at a time. And you'd kind of like add one and feel like overwhelmed by the amount that was going on at once. And then like you get having 2 tables going on, and then, you'd add another one, and all of a sudden you're comfortable with 3 games. And I think, basically when I sort of got into a real swing of it, or the sort of full-time gig, it was probably like 6 or 8 tables at once. And you're getting through like a few hundred hands in an hour. And it's like basically the most sort of, complex kind of multitasking, just like juggling balls at once. But it's also kind of, I guess, addictive, not in just, the sense of, gambling or whatever, but just having that much sort of information and stimulus at you. Like I found it kind of hard to go back the other way and maybe only play.
Yeah, I was going to say, does it in some ways it could almost keep you more, maybe not more engaged, but sort of, if you're playing one table, you've got like say 6, 7 or 8 people, you can find yourself sort of switching off while, Old Joe Blogs is like looking at his 2 and 3, thinking, what do I do for 25 seconds? Like, is that what you sort of found, that you were sort of, your mind was just sort of locked in at that point?
Yeah, 100%. Like once you got used to that sort of level of like action and stimulus coming at you, like if you loaded it up and it was just slow and you had one or like two tables, you find yourself watching a video on YouTube and, you know, scrolling Twitter and everything else like at the same time, which is like, well, this is ridiculous. You're playing 2 games of poker, but what, you're also bored at the same time. So yeah, you really get used to it.
Yeah, that's real sicko stuff. If you're scrolling on Twitter while you're playing 2 games of poker, I hate just scrolling on Twitter. What would a normal week look like for you in the middle of all this?
Yeah, so this was when I was at uni, and so I would like study and I'd make most of my classes. I also became an expert at gaming the roster, and like ended up like choosing a couple of classes just because of the days they were on, so I could like condense the whole like hours of contact down to like 2 days a week that I had to turn up to uni, and then basically left like 5. But I probably wasn't. Well, I definitely wasn't the most disciplined sort of player or had like a set sort of routine or whatever. But really, like I just log on whenever I felt like it, probably in the late morning or midday, and you'd end up getting like the whole day and play into the night. I wasn't like, there's a lot of poker players, or like basically anyone playing online stuff ends up, sitting up all hours of the night like a vampire or anything. But I couldn't ever quite like be one of those, full sickos who was done until like 4 a.m. Not to say that there weren't sessions that like, probably went way or definitely did, but I think I'd try and keep like a pretty reasonable hour. I suppose the other thing with the online games is that most of the people I was playing with weren't from Australia. They were from, I guess in the early days, like the US and Canada, and then the US banned online poker early on, and that was kind of known as Black Friday. And after that, the industry changed a fair bit. And so then I was mostly playing against people from Europe and things like that. So you did have to maybe play like in the morning or later in the evening just to like find some games when other people were on. But I wasn't keeping like a great sort of routine or trying to do the same thing every day. But it really is like a grind, because you're just kind of sort of waking up and going about your business and sit down and not leave for 8 hours.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know, because I know you can't, it's banned in Australia, right, as well. Is that right?
Yeah, so that was sort of after I stopped playing it regularly, but the Australian sort of government basically introduced legislation that forced all of the, the big online companies, PokerStars and the like, to stop offering their services to Australian customers. So, like, to be perfectly honest, I don't keep up with it. I don't know what it's like these days, but I'm pretty sure it's still sort of outlawed, and there's not really much of a scene in Australia.
Was there any particular reason why it was banned, or is it just one of those things where they couldn't regulate and get their piece of the pie?
Yeah, I think that was pretty much it. What these things always come down to is they probably wanted their slice of it. And all of these were overseas companies who were, taking Australian customers but not paying any taxes to Australian government or whoever else. So they kind of stepped in and did whatever they needed to do to kind of outlaw that. But the bigger one was after I sort of stopped playing. But when the US kind of did it, that was really, trying to even think back now what year that they changed it. It might have been like 2008 or something. But it was like really just like a gold rush before that, when all the Americans were still on there. And then that was like 75-80% of the player pool was kind of, wiped out. Yeah.
That's
so
crazy.
The game after that.
Yeah. We'll move on from that. I'd like you to touch on the mental side of it. Like, for so many people, something like this is just not something they would put themselves through. Like, I would love to know how you found, you sort of touched on that, you know, you didn't have, say, a set routine, but how did you find a way to cope with the mental side of it? And you said it was a grind. Like, how did you cope?
Yeah, I mean, I had my ups and downs, and like, how did I cope was sometimes I didn't cope too well. I found it extremely tough mentally for a lot of reasons, but obviously the game itself, but also, yeah, at the end of the day, I was, you know, sitting in my bedroom and playing this like online. So I found it pretty socially isolating.
Mhm.
And yeah, like I had my uni for a few years, and then obviously, yeah, social life outside of that, but just like the day to day, like sitting there sort of every day behind the computer and maybe not speaking to anyone for 8 hours or something. And that was pretty tough. But yeah, especially the couple of years after I'd finished, I'd graduated, and I ended up doing it sort of another 2 years, I think, without you know, studies or anything like that. And at that stage, it really started to sort of wear me down, and that's when I think I sort of really got over it. So there was that side of it, but also just, yeah, dealing with like the swings of it it's wild. Like it really is a proper roller coaster, and just managing your emotions is such a big part of it. Like, I don't know if you've ever played any sort of poker at all, but like, you know, the sort of phrase
I've
to go on.
I've watched Johnny O play poker at Crown. That was an emotional roller coaster in itself. Watching him melt down. That's the only experience I have.
Yeah, then you've probably got a good insight into watching someone melt down at the tables then, if you've seen that. But yeah, like to go on tilt is just to kind of get like that head of steam, and it's like you could feel it happening sometimes, but like that was a real kind of difficult one to separate yourself from. Like something had happened, you lost a hand, lost a big pot, or whatever it is, and you know, you got unlucky. Some guy hits, you know, a one outer on you, and all of a sudden you're like, this shouldn't be happening. And you can feel your emotional state, like that sort of cartoon, the steam blowing out your ears kind of job.
Yeah.
But then also having the discipline to say, all right, well, I know now I'm not focused, and I'm not playing my best, and this is not optimal, that I should stop. That was really difficult. That's like such a big part of like being successful over the long term, is trying to sort of manage those kind of stays, which it's like hit and miss. You know, I was okay at it, but sometimes you're definitely sitting there for longer than you should, and you end up not really, making the best of it, because you can feel yourself like, it's almost like an out of body experience, I guess. Like you're just sitting there and you're like, I should be beating this guy. And yeah, for me, like the addictive part, or like that kind of not being able to stop, wasn't about like the money, or, you know, trying to win back what I lost or anything like that. But like I'm such a sort of competitive person that, like, if I was in a game against someone who I knew I had an edge on and they were like beating me, I'm like, this isn't how it should be. Like I should be beating this guy right now. And he keeps like winning his hands, and then it's like, it just has this kind of snowballing effect.
Have you seen Molly's game?
Yeah, I haven't actually.
So there's a scene in that where there's a guy who goes, as you said, full tilt. There's a guy who goes full tilt because he loses one of those hands to a guy that they call Bad Brad, and he completely loses his mind. And eventually that turns into a 2-day session where his wife ends up filing for divorce. And I think he loses over $1 million. So it's a really good description for what you just explained.
Yeah, I think it's also probably important to point out I was single for all this time as well as I played. Like it's not a, that was a good few years, but it's not a lifestyle that's conducive to, having someone stick by your side and watch you just do dumb shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, it's kind of funny like that. But there are other times where I needed like a longer break, and those are the tough to deal with because it wasn't just like one session. It wasn't like you're going on tilt, but like you could have a real downswing where you've just lost, a heap of money, and every day is the same, and it just feels like this relentless like grind. And I'll be like, look, I just need to sort of stop playing for not even a day, like a week, 2 weeks. There's, I think, like the once it was in 2010, and fortunately I was like VIP level at I think it was Party Poker at the time, so I had like a concierge and all this sort of stuff on tap, and I was just having the worst time of it. And all my mates were just going to Europe. It was in like July, so they were going over there for the summer, and like, nah, this is like, I can't deal with this anymore. So I got them on the phone and was like, yeah, can you get me to like the Greek islands tomorrow? And I ended up just going on like a 6-week trip. Like, it was less than 24 hours, which I think was one of the more ridiculous things I've done. It was like, head off to a European holiday for like 6 weeks, and the flight that I booked was like less than 24 hours out. I hadn't planned anything. It was just like, I just had to get away from it. But like that was I guess the upside to doing that for a few years was, I guess, in my early 20s, and everyone else was kind of battling their way through some part-time jobs, and you're always scrounging for a bit of drinking money. And I was I wasn't a millionaire, but I had a bit more play money than like I ever expected at 21 or whatever.
Yeah,
so it was all fun.
Yeah, I think, and obviously I didn't do it on close to the scale that you're sort of talking about, but where we used to work together, I can definitely relate to the swings and things. Like, obviously with the way the American sports seasons are laid out, like hockey and basketball, it's like if you have like a bad like 2 or 3 days, you're like, shit, like how do I get motivated to go look at the games for a fourth day? And I'm like, I like 4 or 5 different things, and I'm like, am I just going to lose all of this as well? Like the mental side of it, I think, is like, I consider myself a mental midget. Like I could not like handle it. Like some days it was like too tough for me. Like I would just need to take a week or a month off. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, 100%. Like, and I'm sure you would have felt the same way, even just having a bet on sports or like anything of the sort. You just kind of look at it, and you're kind of already broken from what might have happened to you yesterday or the day before, and just trying to like sort of put that behind you and like really keep your sort of mind fresh. It's a tough thing to do.
A mind like yours is going to be far different to, say, someone like me when you're playing a game of poker. Obviously, if I'm going through looking at a hand when I'm playing with mates, we're having a couple of beers, I'm not analyzing and I'm not thinking. I've probably got some terrible thoughts in my head. What is it that sort of goes on when you're like playing a hand? Like, are you analyzing, say, betting patterns, or it's looking for a certain tells that other players have to sort of try and find an edge or a weakness?
Yeah, it's just like that scene in The Hangover where he's like, just the numbers are like coming around, and he's looking everywhere, and you're just like reading the Matrix kind of in front of you.
It's tumbleweed.
So yeah, you hit on it there with talking about like the betting patterns, because that's the most important thing, and that's where you get your most information from. And like, even people who play live and your live professionals, like the most info they get isn't whether the guy kind of scratches his nose when he's got a weak hand or a strong hand or anything like that. It's about how often they bet and how much they bet, all those kind of things. So like an obvious one would be if someone is a really kind of timid player and you just notice that they never will raise or they won't have a strong bet, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they do something like that and re-raise you. Well, you know, you might respect that more than someone who is constantly just throwing money around and chips in the pot and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, you're kind of like looking for betting patterns, how frequently people are doing things, and it's probably easier online to track with like a huge amount of data. But yeah, it's really just all about kind of reading, you know, what your opponent's got, and you kind of figure out what kind of, you know, range of hands they might have. You're never sitting there and saying, oh, this guy has exactly, you know, the ace of diamonds and the king of diamonds or something like that. Like rarely you might be able to put him on a range that small, but you might say, oh, look, he's got a hand that sort of fits in this kind of strength range, or it might be the polar opposite. They've got absolutely nothing, or they've got a really strong hand and nothing in the middle. So you kind of, you know, determine what your move's based off that. And yeah, it's just kind of being able to process a lot of things at once coming at you. It's not complex maths or anything like that. And,
Yeah.
you know, the sort of percentages and stuff aren't too hard to work out. And once you've sort of done it a few times, it becomes just I guess, a bit intuitive.
Would you ever throw out, say, erratic betting patterns to sort of throw people off? So you say you're like, okay, I've got maybe 2 or 3% of my pot. You know, I know this is maybe a shit hand, and you were like, I'm just going to fire off a couple of fake grenades just to see what it does to people and maybe change the way that they play.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you're trying to optimize like your game, you have to do stuff that's, I guess, similar to that. Whether it's like, you know, throwing in a pure bluff or occasionally playing a hand not how you'd normally play it, or things like that. Yeah, sometimes
Like,
you just got to,
like Johnny O would.
Yeah, like
Radically.
just, you know, erratically throwing chips in left, right, and center, and doing all sorts. Yeah, you got to keep them on the toes.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. Obviously, this sort of a lifestyle isn't normal for, say, an 18-year-old male or female is. You know, it's sort of the time of your life where, you know, you touched on, you know, you worked for beer money, and that's usually what most people are doing at that age. What was it about poker that was, you know, maybe it was so special to you that, you know, you sort of committed this, you know, all this time at such an age where most kids are probably not even thinking about doing that?
Yeah, because like I said at the start, it wasn't about the money. I mean, I started off with a sort of that World Series kind of sparked my interest, but I started off from playing play money and playing for a couple of cents here or there. And I was just, you know, passionate about like learning something new, and sort of saying that like a real kind of formative time and like a transitional time in my life, going from school to uni, and socially there was, you know, sort of plenty of things going on and trying to lose myself in that. And then it was sort of a couple of months into my first year at uni, which is, yeah, probably still sitting there at playing for $1 at a time or something with a bind like that. And then my dad died just of a heart attack one night, completely unexpectedly. And yeah, so that was less like the biggest change ever in my life, and a lot of grief to process. And it was kind of at that stage that I really just buried myself into it. I think, yeah, mentally I just needed to escape, really, like escape sort of from like my feelings, and just, you know, sort of being able to process that sort of grief and change. And yeah, with my family around me, it wasn't like I just became a little hermit or whatever, but in my spare time, just to sort of keep my mind occupied and not thinking about those things, I was playing poker, and I was reading about it and studying it, and I was just kind of trying to keep my mind active and distracted, I guess, from the whole time. And that was, yeah, when I was 18, and I guess things just sort of fortunately worked for me from there. And, you know, life became more normal slowly. But the poker part of it had become, I guess, ingrained in as a part of my life at the same time. Um, and then, things sort of evolved from there, I guess.
It's incredible to see that that you were able to sort of maybe not switch off what was going on, but find a way to help yourself go through the process.
Totally. I think everyone's got something like that. And you'd probably be the same with hockey or something like that, I guess. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those things. And, as I sort of explained to you off the air, that, like most people have had some, some family stuff that, that I've experienced. And, what it was hockey at such a young age, which, I really gravitated to. And it's a weird thing for me to look back on, and I'm a very reflective person, and I look back on that when I was sort of 16 and just started getting into hockey, and I'm like, sort of look at how it's changed my life and my life path, and it's sort of crazy to me that to think if I started just watching squash or something, like just take a completely different path. We would never have met because I wouldn't have worked at Sportsbet, and I wouldn't have been able to have all these experiences. But yeah, it is. I think everyone does have that thing, and it's you talk about sort of being outside of poker now. Do you still look back at it and look back on this part of your life like really fondly, and it means a lot more than what it would to most people, to you?
Yeah, well, I think I look back at it, fondly, and it's probably a sense of just nostalgia. I'm getting old now. I just turned 33 the other week, so these days are well past me. We're talking like a decade ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I had a lot of good times and enjoyed it, and I think it benefited me greatly. But like, do I miss it? Absolutely not. I certainly didn't for like the last sort of couple of years of playing poker, and I basically hated it for at least a year before I sort of gave up completely and moved on with my life to the next chapter. But like, I wouldn't change, my sort of path or anything for the world. It would have been nice if I was like a bit more successful and had won like a couple $1 million instead of just, a bit of money to sort of pay my way through uni and live through my early 20s. But I wouldn't change it, but I definitely don't miss it.
Yeah, no, I think that's an incredible way to sort of segue out of poker into, that next chapter. And obviously, you're a huge basketball fan, and the work that you did get into was largely focused around that with Sportsbet. NBA and betting in particular exploded in Australia over that sort of time where we worked together. Seeing it firsthand, was that something that you ever expected?
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, I never expected to be in that job. I just kind of stumbled into it. It came up at the right time in my life, closing that door on poker. And this job got thrown my way that I didn't even know existed. Someone said, "Hey, there's a job application. It's for a company called Sportsbet, and it's a role for a US sports trader." And the requirements were got to be sort of good with numbers and percentages, and I wanted created a job specifically for me. So yeah, that was back in 2013, and started that because the other part of my life that I haven't sort of talked about was just a sicko for basketball, and playing, watching, whatever I could do was I found someone who was prepared to pay me to kind of watch basketball for large portions of the day. Yeah,
I couldn't believe it most of the time. I was like, how is this? Like, I remember complaining, like looking at the BIR schedule, and I'd look at it and I'd be like, oh, that is such a bad schedule. And I would get home, I'm like, how the fuck did I just complain about
yeah.
that? That's crazy.
You're like, oh, I didn't get to trade the game I wanted to, or I have to, do baseball when really I wanted to do something else. But like you talk to your mates who are, working whatever jobs and tell them what you're doing, and they're like, you got to be having a laugh, really.
Yeah.
Like this is ridiculous. You get paid for that. Yeah.
You're
How did
upset
you?
because, yeah. Well,
How did you
I
end up
was
getting into the job?
I was working in as a weird one because I was working in customer service at Sportsbet at the time,
Oh yeah.
and an email came across like a press release about the Australian ice hockey, and that someone, I don't know who priced it, but someone put up a market for it, and I replied to the email because I'm one of 7 sickos in Australia who watches it, and I said, hey, that team folded, and then that was at that point, someone said, do you know, can you help us with this? And so from there, I got to meet a couple of people in the team, and they said, yeah, we'll teach you a few things about how to price stuff, and you can tell us what your opinion is on the games coming up in Australian ice hockey this weekend. And I mean, we've both seen the total turnover on that for a season. Like, that was a real waste of time. But that was the first time where I was like, holy, like, it was like the training floor was like a mythical place where I was like, that's where happiness lies. And then, yeah, after doing that for a season, there was a job just came up and I applied for it, and then, yeah, here we are. I remember the first time meeting you, and I was like, oh, what'd you do before this? And you were like, oh, I was a professional poker player. I was like, I used to answer phones. But it was.
I did call myself a professional poker player. I was probably just like, I play poker. But yeah, I do remember meeting you actually the first time. Now that you bring it up, was the Australian ice hockey. We went to a game at down in the Docklands there, and so it was the trading team, and then I think it was like, oh, well, we got to invite the guy from customer service who actually gives us the prices for this thing. So down you came, and I think a few beers and watching some of the finest hockey that Australia's got to offer.
Yeah,
and then
absolute supreme way out. But getting the job there. It was a very interesting. I think I did it for about 5 or 6 years. It was very interesting for me because I never thought, or not that I ever thought that was the sort of job I would get into. I'd only really had these real run-of-the-mill jobs. Like, I dropped out of school. I was what you would call a foot soldier, and so I'm not someone you would go like, oh, can you work out this calculation for me real quick? Like, so to get that job, I think for the first like 12 to 18 months, I was sort of like almost not in awe, but I was sort of like, I can't believe I'm here. And I felt like that was the wrong approach. And it was sort of like, I was sort of, rather than actually doing things and like educating myself and trying to like go out of my way to get better and to ensure that I keep the job, I was sort of just like, shit, I'm lucky to be here. Thanks for the beers. But it was interesting to see how things changed from the start of our time there to the end. And we sort of we'll get into the basketball side of it because no one cares about Australian ice hockey. But if you see an NBA betting market now, you have every single player, what points, what rebounds, what steals. Like talk about what it was like at the start and sort of the mindset that obviously you and another basketball legend, Adam Cox, had.
Shout out to the big dog.
Yeah, shout out to him. He'll be upset that he didn't get the call yet.
He'll get the call up soon enough.
Yeah,
I don't know if
I'm running out.
Doreen yet though. So.
There's no NBN out there.
Like it was just a whole different ball game. Like, pardon the pun. Back then, I still remember when I started there in 2013. Like, looking after the NBA, and was like, oh, there's a game on ESPN today. Should we put up maybe a player market for it, and we'll put up, you know, LeBron James points and maybe Steph Curry points, and we'd leave it at that, and we'd manually build these two markets and add it to the sort of list of you know, just the regular sort of game options that you'd always had to bet. And then, yeah, like it's just this kind of constant evolution, and it's kind of fed itself as it's got more and more popular. I don't think anyone expected, like, NBA is the most bet on sport in Australia. And yeah, it would turn over more than, you know, the domestic codes and things like that when you add up, when you sort of compare them individually. And like, you could never have sort of seen that even 5 years ago, but there's just this appetite for it, and like the product sort of evolved. So, you know, we went from that to, oh, well, we should do 2 players for every game, to, well, maybe we should do the key players for every game. And it's like, oh, well, what else can you do? Rebounds, assists. And then, yeah, as it was like, well, people actually enjoy betting on this stuff. I think it's like just really engaging, and it's something that people find probably more entertaining when you're kind of watching it, and it's like on that really granular level, and you're cheering for a particular player instead of, you know, maybe just a generic outcome or something like that. And then, yeah, it sort of evolved to where we got today, where you've got all sorts of things, your same game multi, and you can combine all sorts of players, and you can price up basically anything you want, and offer it to you on any sort of NBA game that's there. So yeah, it's definitely not something that I sort of ever expected to see, and it's yeah, interesting to see where we'll sort of take it next, I guess.
Yeah, it's crazy because if you think about it, let's say you're going to watch a footy with your mates. And I don't care how smart, how dumb you are, you always have a thought on a particular player. And you say, I bet Charlie Dixon's going to kick 7 goals today. You
just say that every week, though. So.
Yeah. You know, he's playing on Josh Bootsma. I bet you he's going to have a field day. And so, you come up with these, and I'm an absolute fiend for same game multis, and I never hit them, and I could not care less. It's like, what? I don't know. I described it as something. It's like, it is like the non-drug based crack for me. Like, it is, I can't get enough of it. And there's so many,
not the only one.
No, and so many people go to a sporting event and they're like, you know, I have this feeling, or like I woke up on this side of the bed and the missus said something to me, and I was like, holy shit, Mark Murphy's going to kick a goal today. And so if you think about it, like, we've always had this thought, and it's weird that it's taken this long for it to like finally like become like a product.
Yeah, I think it's like the kind of lottery ticket aspect of it. You can sort of bet small, win big. It's engaging. Like, you could throw all the players that you feel like in this thing. You could have 10 of them. You could have, you know, more. There's something you're cheering on every possession, or you're kind of sweating every kind of moment of the game. And yeah, like, it doesn't take a huge investment to kind of get that feeling. I guess, yeah, it's the same as buying a lottery ticket. Like, most people don't win, and most people don't care, but it's that sort of moment that you have when you're holding the ticket and you're thinking about like what could be, or, you know, how it could sort of play out. And it's more fun than watching 7 balls bounce and being drawn out at random, I reckon, sort of sticking them all on whatever sport's being played, and whoever's kicking or chasing a ball, or whatever it might be.
No, 100%. It's, you know, it's one of those things, and obviously people who are impartial to gambling, this is probably not the part of the episode for them, but it is fascinating to me to sort of, you know, to look back at it, you know, in that 2012, 2013, to like, you know, like manually trading a baseball game at 3 a.m. to, you know, to where it is now. It's not something that I ever saw coming, but something that I feel very lucky to have been involved in and to be paid to watch sport for a particular point in time. Let's jump into like analytics. Obviously, NBA and well, pretty much every sport is sort of heavily heading in towards an analytics direction. As someone who is into analytics and does look at the game differently to say the average person, what have been the biggest things you've taken away from say the NBA game now as opposed to say back in 2010 or any time?
Yeah, well, the game has obviously evolved. At the same time, we're talking about all these betting products, but like you look at the league itself, the way it's changed. A lot of them are, obvious and sort of well known now, and the sort of moves to removing that kind of inefficient mid-range two and making sure that players are only taking shots at the rim or they're taking three-pointers. We've seen like that lead to way more efficient, way better offenses. Like the defenses have got more sophisticated, but it's still hard to sort of catch up. So, total scores have gone up as they've got better. The paces increased at the same time. Some genius worked out that if you play faster and get more shots up, then you'll have more chance of getting points. He's 7 seconds or less offense back at the Phoenix Suns, and we sort of seen that taken to kind of extreme versions with the Rockets, even though their pace wasn't quite at that sort of level. But James Harden just sort of doing his thing, and the way his game sort of played is kind of like, I guess, almost the pinnacle of basketball analytics there. And I think the interesting thing is, like, looking back, like everyone knows this now, it's public knowledge or whatever, but at the very start, it was, just some guys poring over the data and then sort of taking it to the decision makers in charge of the basketball, in charge of the coach, and the coach in charge of the team, and getting them to buy in on it and try it. And yeah, seeing these edges that these teams had, like, the Spurs in their kind of sort of not glory years because they've been strong for decades really, but some of those teams around that era where they were winning the title, and they were one of the teams that figured out that threes in the corner are more important than trees up the top because it's closer to the rim, so they make more of them. Like, it's not, it's something this when you see it in retrospect, but it really took like years, took decades for people to figure this out. The 3-point line's been in there for I don't know how long, 40, 50 years or something now, and it's sort of only taken to this point that someone really kind of went, 3 points are worth more than two. Maybe we should try shooting more of these.
Yeah, it's weird because if you think about it, you literally go, it's very easy to measure this, guys, to like, how did no one think of it? I think a lot of people, when it comes to sports are very, like, if you think about, use hockey as an example, like there's been fighting in it forever. And, you got people now saying, well, fighting should not be there. And so much of the argument is, well, it's been there forever. Don't change the sport. And so people who try to think, say, outside of the box, or they have something which is not, traditional thinking, they just get absolutely blasted for it. And so it's like, it's understandable that, say, if someone was like, hey, I think I found something, they're like, yeah, beat it, nerd.
You see that classic argument in like every sport, and I guess baseball was the first one that started the analytics kind of movement, and it went from there. And even you wouldn't think that like the aesthetics of baseball could change too much, but now you even get people complaining like, all these guys trying to hit home runs and they either strike out or hit a home run, like that's boring. What happened to the good old days where they just hit little singles and bunt across? And if someone says that like maybe that's not the best way to do it, then you get in this massive argument. And the NBA's, it's funny watching like the talking heads talk about it on TV, and Barkley or someone will just throw out like analytics like it's the devil. It's like, talk about all that analytics and like anytime there's like some ugly basketball or like teams are like bricking threes and they're like, it's broken. This shows that like maybe they should just not do this. And it's like, well, that's kind of how, percentages and things work. Like it's going to have moments where it looks like shit, but over the long run, like this is just a better way of playing, and you're going to score more points. And those sort of arguments are kind of frustrating to watch, because it's not like people are trying to ruin the game, or that even, analytics are at fault for, I guess, problems with any of these sports. But those real old school guys still can't quite come around to it.
Yeah, that's always that's a really interesting thing you pointed out there, where the argument, like you're trying to ruin the game. It's like by playing in a different style. Like, if you look back and, before they played, there would have been a different style of basketball. And then obviously the triangle offense comes in. Like it's essentially just playing the game a different way, and like in a smarter, more efficient way. Like hockey is having a really difficult time. You're either very for analytics or you are not for it at all. And, it's crazy where if you outline it on paper, they're like, no, doesn't work. And I'm like, explain to me how it doesn't work. Like I'm literally telling you that if you shoot closer to the net, your chances of going to scoring are increasingly better. Like, no, doesn't work. Like,
they just remember that one game where they scored 0 goals trying that, and it's like, oh well, that means it doesn't work. It's like, well,
yeah. No, let's shoot them up high through 7 different, set of legs, and just puck will magically find its way in the back of the net. That's how you play hockey. It's crazy that, and I guess it's understandable. Like some people are just never going to change. They're never going to accept it.
No, the last bastion of the kind of old school rule, and it was the NFL, and it's really feels like maybe only in the last year or so, especially, that like they're starting to come around, and the old football guys are now starting to think maybe these nerds know a thing or two. So you've seen the big one, I guess, that they talk about if you're watching on TV is going for it on 4th down. Like it leads to a better chance to win than kicking a field goal or taking a punt in some circumstances. But obviously, when it's not successful, it looks worse for the coach. So even though it's like by percentages, it's the right move to make, they've like sort of been so against it. But now they're kind of starting to come around. Also, figured that it's a lot better to be throwing the ball more often and earlier on. I think, there's a real kind of revolution. That was kind of the last sort of space, but even they're coming around to it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be curious to know how often you approach the, say, gambling side of NBA. Like how often you would sort of sit down and review that approach sort of as the game obviously evolves. You sort of can't think about, I think the Suns are, an 8-point favorite, like you did in 2016 as opposed to now.
Yeah, it's like everything is evolving in that space as well. And you think back, not just about the way the products change, but the way we've priced it, what goes into that. You think about some of like the edges you might have had early on as a bettor, and like how easy these markets were to beat. And someone, for example, if you were putting up a player's points line, they'd just look at, what's their average? Just, Google it or something like that. And LeBron averages 25.5 points a game. So that's it. Every game he's going to be in for 25.5. And then it's like, well, you kind of evolved in that space. It used to be easy to kind of bet into it and beat those sort of things. But both the punters and I guess on our side it would go a lot more sophisticated, and the sort of things that you're looking at and what goes into it. So you basically got to always be looking at what you're doing and how you go about it. It's a sort of industry like where if you're standing still, you're going backwards basically. Mm-hmm. There's always an edge somewhere, but it's always been closed up. So you've got to be always kind of learning and evolving in that sense, I guess.
Yeah, very different to when I used to price up some stuff with where you just get the old dart and see where it lands.
Yeah, just close your eyes and hit the board.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
10 to 1.
I was lucky though because I knew the markets that I was being asked to build would have three sickos bet on it. So if I got it wrong, I was losing $50 on it. It was easy.
Yeah, that's there's still definitely a few who go about the dartboard method. Don't get me wrong,
Mhm.
but yeah, we're trying to do a better job of it, and definitely I think a lot of people on the other side of the business are doing it too.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll finish up on this one. I'd be interested to know, like we talked about James Harden before. So there's a situation now with him where he wants to be traded to Brooklyn, I think it is. I find it very interesting, and I don't think there's a lot of other sports where a player, a superstar like that, who's under contract and means so much to the team, is like, hey, I'm sitting out until you trade me to Brooklyn. Like
Yeah,
I would love to get your 2 cents on that sort of thing and the way that the superstars sort of the superstars control the NBA essentially.
yeah, totally. They run the whole show. It's a superstar driven league, and it's funny watching this situation. Like Houston's just imploded really off this kind of off season, but I think it's sort of since the change of ownership. But you watch Harden, who's been top 3 for MVP, I think in like the last 4 years, or he's been right up there, and then all of a sudden, on this super max contract, and he's still got a good 2 years and an option to run. He said, "Oh no, I want out of here," and all of a sudden, it's kind of like on Houston to accommodate him, and it's like even more extreme than there's the Anthony Davis situation. Um, just earlier, and he was sort of in his last season and there was a bit more of a kind of a reason to move like for New Orleans, and he still forced their hand, but it was like, all right, this is coming up, and if he doesn't get his way, then he'll just sort of walk and we'll get nothing for him. And you got like James Harden here, who's getting paid a pretty penny at, I think, $45 million a year, and another 2 seasons says, nah, I want out of here, and you guys are going to try and make it happen, or I'll basically make life a living hell for you. He's, in the middle of a pandemic, he's out partying in the clubs in Vegas and not talking to his coach. I don't think he's had a conversation with the new Houston head coach, who's just walked into like the ultimate, shitstorm.
Yeah, I think you described it as unfortunate the other day, the coach.
Yeah, it would be rather unfortunate. I think he's got a bit more than he's bargained for. But like this sort of whole player empowerment movement, the league is kind of changed in that sense and giving more power to the players. And now, like they really do call the shots. And it's also funny how they like put in such a position where they'll get criticized no matter what they do. Like if James Harden stays in Houston, like they're not going to win the championship with this kind of team in the next few years, given that they're all in the last couple. But people will probably try and dunk on him and say that, you've won no rings, like you're not really had a great career, you're a nobody. And then the flip side of that is, you force your way to a team with another star to try and win championships, and they say, oh, it doesn't count because you've tried to work your way into a stacked team, or you forced your way through like something like this. So I think everyone just wants something to get upset about, really, to be honest. But
That's really interesting. You mentioned that. I just thought of another question. The argument for Michael Jordan versus LeBron is that like LeBron had to go to Miami and form a super team, which essentially changed the way the NBA is like to win a ring. What are your thoughts on that argument? Because I'm not someone who I know a little bit about the NBA, but I'm not someone who sits down, watches it, or can have an honest real debate with someone about this topic.
Yeah, well, you can probably clip this bit and maybe put it out there to get some like clickbait and angry attention, because I'll happily plant my flag in the LeBron is the GOAT camp.
Wow.
I'm happy to run that argument. Like, I think he's, when it's all said and done, like, I don't even think it'll be close, to be honest. The Jordan thing is, like, we're talking about the two guys as like the two greatest, and you're really splitting hairs and comparing different eras. But by the time it's all kind of done, the one thing that, like, the MJ stands will point to is like the 6-0, and LeBron's lost 6 finals, and Jordan was 6-0. LeBron had to go to Miami and join these, create sort of super team, and then he had to play with Anthony Davis and all this kind of business. But like, people forget, one, how good Scottie Pippen was. He's one of the greatest players in NBA history, and like, Jordan didn't win any titles without him on his team. And two, the 6-0 record versus 4-6, I think, or what LeBron is at the moment is like, well, he's already made more finals than Jordan ever got to. So
and in a row as well.
Like, he had that run there of making, like, just dominating the East for every year for just basically a decade. So like, I think that's like an achievement of itself, and having to play against like those Warriors teams. And it was really only like 1 year against the Mavs in 2011 where they lost as a finals they should have won. I think every other finals he's been a part of, they've been like pretty sizable underdogs. It's not like, he's kind of behind in that sense. They're the favourites again for this season coming up. I think they're like the clear favourite at their best. They should be like a decent sort of standout. Like, during regular season, it would probably be pretty close. It'll be cruising, but come playoffs, it's hard to see why they're not the team to beat. If he gets another one this year, that's 5 rings. All of a sudden, you're behind MJ. He's playing at like an absurd level for 36 years old. And
it's freakish.
He's got a couple more years in him, and you look at those stats, he'll probably, I think, get past Kareem for #1 points of all time, and he's like up there on every other leaderboard for all those like pure counting stats. So I think when we look back at it in a few years' time, don't know if everyone will come around to it, but I think like the numbers and on the basis of the whole career will definitely be LeBron's the GOAT.
Well, I hope that makes a lot of people angry, and we get a lot more views. But mate, thank you very much for doing this. It's an incredibly interesting story about your poker, and then to sort of touch on the personal side of it, and then to sort of the stuff you're doing now and the basketball, which is obviously going to be something that a lot of people are interested in and will take out of. So it was a really, really insightful chat. And thank you very much for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.